welcome once again, episode 11 of the Sesh, powered by Cornfed Coaching FC. Along on the show with us today is Willie McNab. Willie is the head of the children's program for Celtic Football Club. And we have on the panel with us today Ross Moffat of Iowa Soccer and Adrian Parrish of FC Cincinnati. Before we get to the Sesh, I did want to give a quick plug to the Iowa Soccer Association's virtual symposium, which is February 27th through 28th. Registration for both individuals and organizations are still available at www.iowasoccer.org. The $250 organization pass gets your entire staff, paid or volunteer, into the symposium to see an absolutely world-class lineup. Whether your club or program is from in-state or out-of-state, all are welcome. If you're a youth club, high school program, college program, or any program interested in obtaining more soccer education for your staff, this is a deal that cannot be missed. As you see along here, we've got some great presenters lined up for the Iowa Soccer Symposium as well, including Willie McNab. So with that, let's turn it over to Willie, and let's start episode 11 of The Sesh.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of give a little bit of kind of detail, and again, guys, just kind of feel free to jump in if you want a little bit more detail and stuff as well. So this is kind of numerical superiority. When I spoke to Damien about doing something, this is actually a kind of topic I presented on in Chicago. I think it was the 2019 session. I did this in the classroom, but I didn't do this on the field. So it's actually really good for me to be able to get into it in a little bit more detail. So this is obviously aimed at when I was the U16s coach. I think this session was from about 18 months ago. So I kind of just wanted to give you a kind of bit of context to why this was important to us and for doing this session. So I kind of wanted to speak about kind of what the numerical superiority is, where does it take place. And it's a more tactically led session, but trying to layer it in with some technical objective as well. So kind of going from this 4-2-3-1 into a 3-4-3, but with a kind of box midfield. And I want to speak a little bit about box high and box low. And the reason why I wanted to give some context to this was hopefully so that it kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand. And I kind of wanted to go through the examples of kind of this in match play as well. So we speak about kind of building the attack, creating the attack and finishing. So for us, this create the attack, numerical superiority is going to take place in the middle of the pitch. We want to make it kind of more solid, more stronger, and try and outnumber the opponent. That's the kind of whole idea of this sessions, about getting one more than the opposition. And you can tend to do that with a 4 versus 3. Sometimes a team might play a 4-4-2 diamond against you and try and match you up, for example. But I think for this session, for the purpose of this actual session, it was about trying to get this box in midfield. So you can get the diamond as well, but I want to show you the box. But no risk, low risk passes for the players. And for us being able to break into this incision zone, which is kind of mapped out on the right-hand side here, this sort of 18-yard box, maybe 20 yards back. It's about how we can dominate possession, numbers up to break into that area to get that opportunity to finish. And then we speak about the controlling versus dominating possession within that as well. So this is the context. And I listened to the Paul Bright's recent one as well, which was excellent. And Paul spoke about how he kind of works the session, kind of almost going from the game backwards. It's exactly the same approach that I take from it as well, is almost taking a match situation and stripping that back. That's what I did with the 1 versus 1 session during the convention as well. It's kind of looking at that when it happens in a game. So this is looking at how the box high, for example, can happen within a game and then being able to strip it back. So just on the build-up play, allowing this launch pad. So you'll speak about, you'll see a lot of the session coming from centre-back areas, because it mainly will come from there because of the position of the full-backs, because we want to try and push them really further forward. And we'll speak about triggers. I don't want to get into too much detail just now, but with the position of the centre-back position 4 being quite narrow at the moment, that's going to be the trigger for the box for the players. So the box high is basically going to involve the number 10 moving across to allow the 7 to come in that sweet spot or the half space. So you can obviously take your lines off the 6-yard box and your 18-yard box. Can we get them in there? The 2 and the 11 are going to provide that width. 6 will drop in at an angle to give us that 4, and then the other 3 will sort of swing round. So it gives us that 3-4-3. So that's the whole idea of that box high. It was something that we wanted to try and, for example, I know I mentioned Kieran Tierney quite a lot recently, but when you watched him play such an offensive threat, in the way we want to try and develop our fullbacks, is then being a threat in the final third and trying to get our wide players to come off the sides and try and get a little bit closer to the 10 or get a little bit closer to the 9 so that the 9 doesn't feel too isolated at times. So we've got that kind of real stability behind the ball as well. So I wanted to show this box high and box low before the actual kind of session. So this is the kind of second option, just shown it on the left-hand side. Again, the launch pad trigger. This time the 10 moves across, but the number 8 will then move up to create the space for the 11 to drop a little bit lower. And then the 3, we're providing that width as well. And again, we managed to get these 3 defenders coming round. So in essence, 1 fullback attacks, 1 comes round, and you can attack with 5 and defend with 5 within this. If we were flipping it to a diamond, it would be attacking with 6 and defending with 4. But when we're kind of teaching the young players, certainly this kind of U15, 16s, we wanted to kind of show them this first of all, and how we can go from that 4-2-3-1 into the 3-4-3 box. So just to give you a little sense of, it's the box high and box low, which are really kind of concentrating on throughout that. So session objectives for me are to create a numbers up situation and try and increase the players' tactical understanding of this situation. So can they see the triggers? Can they see the timing, the moments of when to do this as well? Although we're going to be looking at some technical aspects of what they do, there's a real tactical understanding of what we're trying to create within this as well. This is going to allow us to dominate the ball and impose our play. We want to try and take the game to the opposition and have this real rotation. We used to call it, we used to reference it as the washing machine, where there's this constant rotation of these players in the middle of the pitch. So an 8, a 6 and a 10 were comfortable playing any position. Already, sorry guys, apologise. I go a bit like Billy Connolly. I start a story, go away and come back again. So apologies if I lose my train of thought. But you can start to get fullbacks coming in as well, where you can get the false fullbacks coming in at the bottom as well. So there's loads of different ways to interpret this. I think just for this session, it's trying to show the box high and low. And although it's in an offensive position, I don't want to miss out about the defensive positioning, because for me, if I'm attacking, I need to be in a good defensive position. 1, for the transition to defence, but 2, to allow us to counter press as well. So if we can have those distances really short and we can impose our play in the opposition, if we lose it, we can go and suffocate the opposition as quickly as possible. And the last 2 moments are probably more from a psychological point of view, about this empowering and autonomy supportive environment. I don't want to joystick the players. I don't want to give them all the answers. I just want to maybe that little bit of guided discovery and move them along. But I want to empower them to allow them to make mistakes, but also make decisions within that as well. And that will give me the teachable moments that I like to call it within the session, that I think we can sometimes go with a session plan and all intents and purposes, I'm going to do A, B, and C, but it doesn't quite work out that way. We then have to see something and say that's a teachable moment. But for me, it's about how you do that and when you do that as well. And these are some of the things that certainly I think about, that none of my sessions are off the cuff, because I think you guys know that as well, that good players will sense this if you're turning up and just chucking on a session. So there's real thought behind it. Our players go to school together and train in the morning. So me and the other coach would chat how many players are available, how many are injured, how many have maybe not done their homework, so they're not going to be training that evening. What side of area have we got? What's the weather like? All those types of things, because that has a bearing on the session created. And then being able to say, okay, what's the objectives and how it's linked back to our philosophy. For me, that's a huge part of that we want numerical superiority, and the physical theme is speed. That goes back to our periodization program, because it's the U16s. Again, this isn't just a random session, it's kind of plucked out of thin air as well, and how we're going to achieve this through that as well. And these are just things, I'm not going to go through them all, guys, but the requirements of the coach. I think Jose Mourinho was talking about it the other day about his planning and preparation. That has to be key. It has to be a flow within it. Daft things like how long's training, the duration of the exercise, how long's each block within that exercise, what's the rules, if you've got 2 or 3 coaches with you, who's doing what, and everything just runs smoothly. If we're using certain areas of the pitch, we take the drinks with us so that the players take their drinks and it's a swift change on to the next one. And we're really demanding of what the players and staff kind of need to do. And we need to make sure that the players understand that. And because if they don't fully understand, there's a reason why. And I'll speak about that in the reflection part as well. And then just the last part before going on to the session is, this is what we there's real requirements of the players. Now, guys, I don't put this together before every session, but this is what each coach and we know before we go into the pitch, and the requirements of the player as well. So they're going to be challenged. There's going to be demands placed on them. Ross, you'll know better than anybody when you're back in Scotland that players can take the huff so very, very quickly because you're trying to push them a wee bit in certain things as well. So we want to say to them that it goes back to that empowering environment, that we're doing it for a kind of reason as well. So, guys, this is, I wanted to show you what a session plan looks like, how I would create a session plan on a day-to-day basis. But what I'm then going to do is I'm going to go into each exercise in detail and animate it a little bit. Adrian, have you want to ask anything just now?
No, I did, mate. You saw me unmute myself, didn't you? Fantastic.
No worries.
Yeah, so some great detail there straight away, Willie. And obviously, I'm looking at the idea of your box, the high box, low box. How much do you have to walk through stuff like that with kids before you even get out on the field? Before you even get out on the pitch, mate? How much do you do?
Yeah, we've done it a couple of ways. We were fortunate at our training facility. We've got a kind of media room that we can take the players into. Mm-hmm. So see literally the slides that I showed you there. Yeah, we showed them stuff like that. We've then kind of extrapolated some clips from games, and it maybe be from the first team, for example, or another age group. So the U18s were doing it at the time as well, and be able to show them as examples. And all of a sudden, you can see a light bulb moment coming from the players.
Of course.
What I usually would do as well, Adrian, is almost I would pin this session up in the wall in the changing room as well, so the players could have a quick look, see the theme, have a rough idea of what we're trying to do, so that at least when they come out onto the field, they've got a wee idea of what the theme's going to be and kind of what the exercises look like. So they would see that as they come in. They've had some food, they've come in, they can see the stuff on the wall. We take them in, and but literally, Adrian, we would take them in for 5 minutes max, and literally say, guys, here's a couple of options for that, and take them out. The first time that I did these practices, we kind of almost did it without opposition, certainly the first part, just to go through it, just to let them understand. So the one that I'm showing today is a little bit more advanced after we've kind of done it for 3 or 4 weeks. And then we would back that up by kind of some video analysis. So we use Huddle at the moment. So we can quickly take a small clip, or we can give that, we'll talk about empowering environment. We'll actually say to the players, watch the game and you clip the game. So you clip a moment where you've done really well to find the box high or box low, or what your role within that was, or can you identify a time where it could have been better? So we can start a little bit of dialogue away from the training pitch as well. So trying to give them everything to try and support them to hopefully understand that a little bit anyway.
I've just got a quick comment, Willie, before you dive into the actual session here. I think it's just important for the listeners of the Sesh to recognise that before you get into the micro details of the exercises, every time you're kind of looking at a game moment and reverse engineering from there in terms of putting your session together, which, I don't think coaches sometimes the level around here is certainly ones that I have on education courses. It's like, okay, what we're going to work on, let's put this passing exercise, and they haven't got to the macro level of taking the game moment and reverse engineering, and then also identifying the objectives of the session before you start trying to put exercises together. So less of a question and just more of a comment to highlight that for the guys listening in.
Ross, it's it's a great point though. I actually just did a thing on my coaching process recently. I'm doing a master's course in sports coaching. It's about coaching process. I was actually going to put it in and show you because it's fascinating when you delve into a coach's mind. The stuff that you have to do. It's not just a case of turning up with the. So I'm going to sound a wee bit American here, but the soccer balls and the pennies and stuff like that. It's all the prep, and I totally understand if depending on what domain and context you're working in, what level you're working in, and if this is a part-time role for you. But I think there's always a duty of care as a coach to put a level of detail into what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. So I think ultimately the players will get a bit of benefit from that, Ross.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Brilliant. And I said, guys, I wanted to show people watching as well and listening. This is kind of how I set a session out. So as you can see quite quickly, it's just got the usual stuff on it. But the key part for me is, if you can see at the top, is the principles. Timing, triggers, body shape, eliminate opponent. So those are, for me, the 4 key things that I want to hammer home. I see a lot of session planners out there, and again, this is just my take on it. I see session planners that have got screeds of information on it. For me, I think it's impossible to go on and take all that info and dump it onto a pitch. I think the players want simplicity to then build upon that. For me, this session plan is for 2 things. It's for a quick reference and for records. So I don't know why, but I can do my session plan, have it in my head quickly, but sometimes I'll have it on a piece of paper, on my mobile phone or a tablet or iPad, quickly have a reference to it, but it's more like record keeping for me as well. So for me, it's really simple. The setup, the instructions and the principles. That's all I kind of really want from this. So the session, the warm-up and conditioning part is done by the athletic development department. We're really lucky that we have them. So it's match day -2, which from a kind of athletic development point of view is speed. So that becomes important for us from our U13s upwards, not so much at the Children's Academy. So they would lead that part of it, and then I would come into my part. So you can see I have discovery practice. So I have 1 discovery practice, which is an introduction to it, box high and box low, roughly spend about 8 minutes on each. And I would probably break that down maybe into 2-minute chunks or 3-minute chunks with so for example, 3 minutes, 1 minute rest, 3 minutes, and then move on to the next one. I'm not one of those coaches that says we're going to stay here until we get it. For me, it's about let's get the information in and let's try and move on as we can. And then this is the second part of the session, guys. Just kind of taking that on a little bit into the Rondo practice, where again I would spend about 3 minutes on each block with a minute in between. After that, I'll get into a phase of play, which will just be a tactical phase of play for 10 minutes. We tried to do a phase of play within every session if we can at the older age group. And then for the last 20 minutes, we would play an 8v8 game, 9v9, depending on numbers. And guys, the reason why I have this register in, these aren't the real names from the under 16s, but I wanted to show you this where a squad of 18, and you can see Lucas and Connor have individual next to them. So we actually take, at a session, we would take 2 players out to do individual work during every single session. So Connor and Lucas were 2 defenders. So we would take them out because it's an offensive session, probably looking at sort of middle to front. Or there might actually be a couple of strikers that we take out from in there as well, that maybe they're not a main part of the session, and they would work for 40 minutes on something individual and then come back in, because we still want them to have a team context, but also something individual within that as well. So guys, this is a kind of the example of the session planner, but this is the kind of real sort of meats on the bones, meat in the bone, if you want to call it that. So first exercise, we have 3 mannequins on the outside, roughly 15 yards between each mannequin. In terms of length, it's about 30 yards between the bottom and top mannequins. And then there's about a 10 to 12 yard square in the middle with the 4 mannequins as well. In terms of the setup, we have the players set up at the top and the bottom and the wide player. So the reason why I put the numbers in here is just hopefully it'll be a little bit more clearer. We have 3 opposition players in. And Adrian, back to your point, this has been something that we've done for a few weeks now up to this point. So we'll put opposition in straight away. So basically the whole point is to try and build the play up across the back three. When it comes to the fullback, we can't go forward, so we pop the ball back narrow. And this is really important because the first point is triggers. This is the trigger for me, is that when either the ball comes back from a fullback or the number 5 steps in and he's playing narrow, that's your trigger for the box. And the reason why we say that, if the positioning of the centre back was maybe here, then the number 6 has to drop as a diamond. So that would be the other trigger. So from this point here, we say the trigger is, can the number 6 drop off a little bit? Can the number 8 play on off the shoulder on a different line? Can the 10 vacate, which allows the 7 to come in box high? Number 2 becomes a wide player, and then you have this 4v3 in the middle of the pitch. So if you go back to the first example that I showed in a game, this is just stripping that out of the game and putting it in a very simplistic passing exercise with a bit of opposition within here as well. And then what we say is the centre back, you have the ball, you're in control of the game. All I want you to do now is pick an option. So for example, the option here, get it into your number 7. We say in here it's live, it's a 4 versus 3. Yellows, if you win it, the game stops. But greens, you have to keep possession and play out to the opposite number 3. When that happens, everyone across the bottom moves along one, and the guys in the middle go back to their position. So effectively, it's almost like a transition happening within the game. And then basically the exercise continues. We ask the number 3 to go 5, to go 2, to come in with the whole idea of playing out here. Now, if I kind of take it back to this position here, the number 6 for me becomes key. They have to drop out to cause an issue. They almost, I wouldn't say they come into the right back area. It's into an area where if I was playing against him, I'm thinking, do I stick or twist? Because it causes problems. And the reason why we say the 8 and the 10 to play in a different line is to try and create more passing lines. So if you say 4-2-3-1, you automatically think there's 4 passing lines. But in here, we've created a passing line through 6, through 8, through 10, through 7, and also through 2. We also ask the players, we don't tell them straight away, but can you play out the eye line of the mannequins? Or can you play out the eye line of the opposition? The only person that should really be seen is a number 6, because we almost want to lull them into a false sense of security. Now, if the opposition decides to stay like this, then we're saying to the centre-back, what's your passing option? Or go into 6. So because into 6, it causes another option, another problem. You can see in here, we say to number 11, keep your width on that side. Try and stretch the game, because the width is going to be from the 11 and the 2. And the reason why we ask the players to rotate round as well, it just kind of gives that bit of realism to that. And then these guys have to make the recovery runs. Now, looking at this, there's a couple of ways to give the viewers or listeners an idea. The very first time I did this exercise was with no opposition in the middle. Totally unopposed. The tempo was quite low, but it was all about the timing and the movement to get that right. The second bit that we added in was this part of it with opposition. But then the next time we really challenged them, we went with 2 balls. So if I take this right back to the start, to here, we actually had a ball here at this number 3, and the yellows played off that ball and the greens played off this ball. So although they had no direct opposition, it was so chaotic, it was unbelievable. And it was really messy, and it kept breaking down. And I absolutely loved it, because that's the game of football. That's what happens. And we just wanted to give them something different to kind of think about in there.
So yeah, Willie, within your role at the club, how important does it now become educating kids and parents that positions don't necessarily matter? Because this, obviously, you can see here, you've already mentioned your 6 is almost coming out and playing out in your right back position. Your 7 at some point is going and playing in the centre midfield position. You know, if this is your style and this is your philosophy, how big of a role does that play with you, the younger the age groups that you're working with, mate?
Yeah, massive, Adrian. It's a great point, and I think that's where parents probably need to chill out and step back a wee bit and trust the coaches as well, because I'll give an example. We had, sorry, I like telling stories, Adrian, apologies. We had a player called Stephen McManus at Celtic. Now, Stephen played, you'll know Big Mick Ross. Mick played as a left-sided winger when he was young, almost kind of like a striker, because he loved running forward and scoring goals. And it was Tommy Burns spoke to him and said, listen, Stephen, you've got unbelievable qualities that playing at the left side, playing at centre-back, you're great in the ball, you read the game. Stephen didn't want to really play there. And they said, listen, trust me, try it. Stephen became the club captain, became the captain of his country, and played in numerous Champions League games. So it just shows you the importance of having that fluidity and being able to play in different styles. Obviously, we want to try and play the 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3, but we want to try and stretch the players. Can you get into a 3-4-3 box or diamond? Especially with the younger players, Adrian, we've got no idea where they're going to play or where they're going to end up. Just now, they've maybe got certain qualities in this position, but we see it 7-a-sides. Listen, if you're we try to adopt something similar, stripped down to the 7-a-sides, that if we play with 2 at the back, for example, we want to try and morph into a 1 diamond 1. So we would ask the defender to come and sit like a 6. So he gets the chance to try as a centre-back, but also as a holding midfield player. We'll also ask them to get the wide player in and go as a wide player like a fullback. Mm-hmm. So that he's getting the chance to play as a centre-back, a fullback, a number 6. Also, your wide player, play like a wide player, but we can ask him to come in and play like a number 8 or a number 10. So you're really stretching those players in age, and I think it's important. And don't get me wrong, you've probably worked with players who you've saw that player's going to play there. It screams that they're going to play that position, but I think it's really important for a player's development to at least sample different areas.
Really, how does that? It is, really. I got the youngest kids at FC Cincinnati, and I look at them and I'm like, he's going to be a 9. But how do I make him a better 9? I probably put him to playing as an 8 to make him better. Do you know what I mean? And so, but I think you said 2 things right there for the listeners: is parents need to chill out, as you mentioned, and no one has the crystal ball. So we have to look at it, and we maybe have a little bit of a potion that we put in the crystal ball because we can see, well, that might be where he's going to be, but how am I going to make him better at being that? It might be putting him, like I said, into the midfield. It might be putting him as an outside, but we don't know, you know. So, but we're only doing it to help that individual. So.
It's a brilliant point that you make, because if you've got a number 9 who constantly turns and runs away, and all you can see is the back of their head and their arse, then you're saying to them, like, go and play 10 or 8. And actually know what that feels like. Exactly. So actually understand, oh, you know what, here's maybe the movement I need to have. So I think it gives them a greater understanding. We did it with a young player called Kieran McKenna, who actually went out and had a bit of a career at Duke University. He used to play as a winger, and he went through a growth maturation part where he couldn't run. So what we did was we said to his dad, we brought him into a position 6. Mm-hmm. He was quite a tall lad. He was really good on the ball, and he was brilliant at linking the play. And see, when he developed the physical capabilities, he went back out there and became a very good 7 and 11. So I think you as a coach, when you set up your IDPs, you can do those types of things as well with your young lads. Sorry, Jamie, did you have a question there as well?
No, you're good, mate. I was just going to ask you, like, how does that kind of influence the language that you use? Do you use the specific like numbers for the positions then, or are you more talking about positioning with the players? Yeah,
certainly at the younger age groups, Jamie, we use numbers as a reference. Do you know, we actually did it to kind of confuse the opposition a wee bit, and we reference channels as numbers on the pitch as well. So channels 1 to 5, and we'd say to the players, when you're in channel 3, think about this. When you're in channel 5, or we could easily shout on, what channel do you need to be in just now? And we did the same with the positions. We still reference the numbers to positions at 11v11, but it maybe becomes less important. Certainly, I would say to the players 7, 11, 10, 8, 6. I think that's the language that the kids understand just now. Because they play video games, Jamie. One of I spoke to a young 8-year-old, and I said to him, "What position do you play?" He says, "Oh, I play DCM." I'm like, what does that even mean? I said, "What does that mean?" He says, "Oh, I'm a defensive centre mid," and they're like, brilliant. But so Yeah, I think for this, it's good to reference those types of numbers. And again, these numbers are represented in different ways across different teams. This just works for us. And the reason why we give the numbers to the kids at 7-a-side, and we use 7-a-side, 9-a-side, 11-a-side in Scotland. So they can see how it goes from 7s to 9s. So when they actually go to 11-a-side and the coach maybe says, I want you to go play 7, they understand what it is. So it kind of grows with the player as they go along, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you said that you do this one unopposed then as well, right?
The very first time I did it, Damien, myself and this coach called Greg Robertson, who's now the U18s coach, we looked at the 3-box-3 and thought, right, okay, how can we come up with something? And so imagine this without those yellow guys in the middle, Damien. That's how we did it. We did it with one ball. I think we only had kind of 12 or 14 players at that time, so it kind of had a decent flow to it as well. It wasn't too slow. And as I said, we actually introduced 2 defenders. So we had a 4v2, and then we kind of started to build it up. It was the only part of the session that had unopposed, so we maybe went unopposed for 12 minutes or so.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah.
So you have 3 different progressions for this activity over the course of your season. You're going to do an unopposed, 4v2, and then a 4v3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly in that middle area. And there's other ways as well. Even while I'm looking at this, you could easily put a player here. So it's a 3v1. So maybe it's more 3v1. It can come both sides. You could maybe have a goal in behind here with a goalkeeper. So when the ball goes through, they have to finish on goal. There's loads of different ways that you can do it. This one just kind of worked for us. And hopefully when I move on to the Rondo and the phase of play, why it became easier. If this makes sense, and I think Ross alluded to it, this was the last part of my session that I actually designed.
Right.
The first part was the moment of the game, and then it was the phase of play, then it was a Rondo. And do you know why I do that as well? It's an easy way to set up your session, because the last part's always the biggest, and everything it's like those little Russian dolls that you get, they just all fit in, and then when you pick the cones up, that goes back to the transition of exercise to exercise. So that's the kind of method behind the madness, really.
So one more question would be, so you're rotating out, and Adrian was talking about rotating players positionally, which I think we all agree is a good thing. And I think your points about parents there is valid. The 3 players that are the yellow players who are defending, is there a rotation involved for them? If there isn't, how would you select them? And then is there a transition for them within the activity when they win the ball?
Yeah. No, that's just the 3 daft goalies that we put in there, Damien. Nobody likes them. So we'll maybe just we'll literally be 3 players. They'll be picked, and we'll take them in and out every 2 minutes. So they'll get in and play in there. Usually what we maybe do is try and pick maybe even 6 players who play 8, 6, 10, for example. And then what we do is maybe the greens then become the yellows for the next one and swap them round. It got a little bit more position specific for this because we're now kind of working with the U16s. So we wanted the 7 and 11 to get a lot of repetition of coming in off the sides. We wanted the 2s and 3s to get a lot of repetition on going on the outsides. And the 8s, 10s and 6s having that chance to rotate. So again, we did it both ways. The very first time was just a new 3 defenders go in. And then as we started to move along with it, we would maybe say, okay, the greens now become the yellows in the middle, and then the yellows back to the greens. So we actually wanted them to experience defending against it as well, to actually say, this is how difficult it is when you're playing against these 3 players so they move properly. So we wanted to give them a flip side, a bit like Adrian said about maybe when they would put a number 9 back to a number 8 to see how the number 9 works. Quite similar to that as well.
Okay. And then the transition piece for the defenders, or are we not worried about that right now? Or are we just, does that come out in the Rondo, the next phase?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So even here, so we would probably work with 16 players in here, for example. And when we did this session, Damien, we actually took those 2 players that I told you about, Lucas and Connor. They'd come out to go and work on their IDPs. And we actually put the 2 goalkeepers in this exercise. So, because we wanted them to get used to feeding the ball across the back. Sometimes we actually even placed them here and they played the ball out to fullback, which started it as well. So we almost flipped it on its head a little bit, that we got the goalies involved, especially if they maybe didn't have a goalkeeper specific evening. And obviously we would go down the left side, so 2 would play across to 5 to 3 and come down here, so right side, left side. And then when we move on to the Rondo, we take the goalkeepers out, and that gives us our 16 players and the goalkeepers would then go and do their goalie specific stuff. So I love the goalkeepers going into certain exercises, because they can be like the AA, they can break down quite a lot, but we want them to be comfortable at using the ball as well in these types of exercises. So those 2 players would be out of this exercise doing IDPs, and the 2 goalkeepers included.
Awesome. So what's the next activity that you have then?
Sorry, Ross, have you got something?
No, I was actually just going to comment. Well, yeah, I love when we were talking about, you know, this exercise progressing from unopposed to like more of a full pressure situation, where you said it was really messy and it was chaotic, and that was a positive. I think that's important as well for the listeners to hear. I think sometimes we, as coaches, we get a bit nervous when it's messy and chaotic, but as you said, that's the game. You want it to feel real and look like the game. So I think that was an important comment that you made.
No, you're spot on, Ross, because I think us as coaches, we want the perfect session, but we've all been coaching for a million years between us and never had a perfect session probably. You've had sessions that have went well. And I think when you get that bit of chaos, and it's not chaotic because things aren't set up properly, it's just more about the environment that you're creating, because the game is chaotic, it's unpredictable at times. So I think if you can replicate that, then great.
But I think, hey Willie, I think that's why it was very good that you put enough detail into your lesson plan, because you can go back to it, right? Like we've all done it. We've all gone back. Oh yeah, I really like that, but I need to add this, and I can do this, and I think, you know, that's why it's like, you know, you can understand that the chaos is fine, and I think, like you said, we expect it to look great on paper, and if it looks great on paper, it's going to transfer great onto the pitch. That's not the case, you know. So
no.
That's never going to be the case, because kids can have bad days just like we can have bad days as coaches as well, and so. But the game's the same, you know.
Yes.
So the game's the same. It's not perfect. It's chaotic, as you mentioned. So I think that's something that coaches have to understand. Youth coaches have to understand that, you know, that's a learning process for you as a coach as well as it is for the players, you know. So
yeah, do you know, it's a good point, and Damien's, apologies for waffling on, but I like to talk. When it comes to like the
you haven't brought the jokes out yet, Willie, so we're okay.
No, listen, there's none coming anyway. Don't worry about it. So see when you go to the convention, for example, you try and go and do a session that you want it to look good for the audience, to be able to take some things from it. But I think if you're prepared, and I think if you hope for the best, plan for the worst, basically. So if something does happen, you can react to it. So if a player goes down injured, or like in Scotland where the wind howls and your mannequins blow over and you can't use them much, so what are you going to do when you turn up at the convention? I was told I was getting U15 boys in LA, and I got a U11 girls who'd never met a Scotsman in their life. They thought a Scotsman was Shrek. I swear to God, they were scared of me. So all of a sudden I'm saying, right, I need to change this. But if you're prepared well enough, you can do that. And I think if there's one thing that I could say to the coaches listening is be prepared. If something happens, be ready to kind of work on the fly a wee bit. So this session isn't off the cuff. This is a well planned out session, but you understand that you can manage certain parts of it as well. And Damien, this is the kind of follow on from that part again. Very similar, comes in, but we want to try and get the box high. So it's the same movement. 10 would come across. This time the number 6 would go up to allow the 7 to drop into that area. And again, we then have the 2 coming high, and we create this 4 versus 3 again. And again, I've just used the example. If they all go tight to us, can you play in between? And then can you play out? And then the whole idea is to shift back round again. Now, I think for me, the timing of it, we call this jump. So we say to the players, jump and get out the area. So we say to the number 6, just spin and jump. So if the opposition's locked onto you, the 10 moves across. For me, that's key, because if your 10 vacates that area, then they know they can go up. It's just almost that counter movement that you're looking for. And then your 7's just coming off the side. For me, this causes a lot of problems. So, Damien, if you're a left back, what do you do here? Do you come in with this number 7 or do you stay? Because if you come in with him, they're just going to play a ball up and over for the number 2. If you let him come, he's going to get turned. So that creates that confusion for the opposition. And this might sound silly, but when I actually did this session, I thought, how would I defend against this? So the way I would defend against it was my wide player would come in and screen the number 7, and the fullback would deal with their fullback. So it means that we don't have to go. But when you do this movement for the first time, it takes coaches a long time and again to figure that out and how to combat it. So I actually thought, okay, I have combated that. Let's find another way to get out of that. And obviously that's another part for another session. But so for me, it was about getting the number 7 in low and the same sort of thing. Trigger for narrow. Can we play out the other side? And then we have the same rotation and the ball goes down the other side. Yes, Adrian?
Well, be honest. I've got 2 comments. I'll be honest. The first time that happened in a game, you was like, wasn't you? You was like very happy when you saw that. So, and then don't you think it's amazing as well? It's funny that, I mean, how the role of the fullbacks changed. You know what I mean? I think there was one of the sessions we had earlier on the Sesh, and we were massively talking about the fullbacks, you know, and I'm talking in, you know, obviously 15, 20 years how the role of the fullbacks changed. And this is massively helping your fullbacks now join into the attack. And how more important they are, not just staying home and defending like they were, you know, when I was still lacing back up many, many moons ago. But, you know, so...
100%.
Tierney and you know, Robertson, the Scottish guys, you know, that are massive with joining into the attack for Liverpool and for Arsenal right now, you know. So
yeah, and I go back to Kieran, you only need to look at the goal he scored against West Brom. He's absolutely roasted their fullback, but he's then come inside on his right foot, and it's something we do white band football. So all of our kids wear a white tuba grip on their non-dominant foot. Okay. So we can see that, and they practice that. So Kieran did that since he was 6 years old. So see when he stepped inside, I knew he was going to have a pop. He's got a wand of a left foot, but he's comfortable on his right. And then I watched him against Newcastle. I think DeAndre Yedlin came on, and DeAndre Yedlin, he can shift. He's a quick player. And again, Kieran just gets the afterburners on. That goes back to the 1v1 situation that I was speaking about. But it shows you your value. Adrian, I think they're spot on. What I would then say is if our right back goes, that our left back must come round and give us that solid defensive balance. And then our 2 in front of them. So if you want to attack with 5, defend with 5, that becomes so important as well. And you just become really miserly in anything that you give away. But people will look at you and think you're such an attacking team, but it's on a bedrock of how solid you are defensively. And this little exercise, you can actually teach that within it as well. And you'll see in the Rondo as well, Adrian, how we managed to put movement-specific runs for the fullbacks in there as well. So, guys, this is then moving on to the Rondo. Again, really, really basic, nothing fancy. It's a 24 yards by probably 20 to 22 yards area. I've made this one directional, so I have 3 sort of back 3 in the greens, a middle 3, and the same for the yellows with 2 neutral wide players. And the whole idea is for the back 3 to keep possession. And this is the example. So our centre back's narrow, then we'll look to play into the middle, but we will encourage one of the players to come in, either a 7 or 11 to come in. So for example, the number 6 will vacate the area, 8 will move across, the 10 will create the space, which is a trigger for the number 7 to come in box low. And then we play 4 versus 3. The ball will then come in. Obviously, our fullback will give us width. Then the ball will come in and we play 4 versus 3. Now, guys, I have to admit that as a coach, that this is just my style. I don't give the players any clues to what we're looking for. Basically tell them the rules. So as you say, guys, when the time's right, play in, get a wide player in, and then play out the other side. So I didn't give any specific information to the position 2 or 3. And every single time, without fail, the number 2 and the number 3 don't move wide. So that's that teachable moment that I speak about, and say, well, guys, what's wrong with this picture that we're looking at just now? Real lack of width. Everything's really narrow. So number 2, why aren't you going? And do you know what they say to me? Well, you never told me. I'm not here to play the game for you. So then they start to understand and recognise things. That's that relationship building with the players. So can the 2 get up and on the outside? And then really important, we tell our number 3 to come in, because that's getting into good habits of protecting against the counter. When the ball goes in, we play 4v3, but we also give the option to go out. So again, you've got your wide number 7 in, and your number 11 plays really wide. When the ball gets played up to the opposite side, this is why I like it directional, and I'll give you some feedback to what the players said about this as well, because players can be an awkward bunch at times, especially the older ones. We then said this is the defensive transitions. So what we said to the Greens were, get back into your position quickly. So Adrian, that's that. Number 2, go. But if you do go, you have to get your tail back as well. And we say to the number 7, go out. And now the game starts again. They can build. The whole idea is to get the ball in, to try and get the 7 and 11 in. Now, we kind of went with a rule of thumb, and there's nothing wrong with this. This is just my preference, is because it's the right centre back, we kind of would say it's easier for the right sided midfield player to come in. If it was on the left-hand side, we'd probably get the left guy to come in. Now, there's absolutely no problem in saying, okay, if the 5's on it, we want the 11 in. That's maybe your preference as a coach. I just thought that it was easier to do it on this side because it was easier for the rotations within there. And then the whole idea was this defensive transition to allow to come back in. Again, I've done this exercise where these players and these players on the outside were neutral players. So when the ball went up to the top, it stayed with the team in possession. But my personal view on it was a better flow when we did it this way. And that's why I made the rondo really tight. I think I said at the start, size-wise, we're kind of looking at 24 to 20. Sometimes I actually made that only 16 yards wide and 20 yards long. So it was really, really tight. So the players had to get and play in small areas. I made it a little bit bigger to get the success, but then made it really tight. That was one of the bits of information that they came back from the players. So what's important for me in this one is that the players, they understand the connection to the first exercise. So let's be honest here, guys. See, if we look at this is just the passing exercise. The only thing that's different is we've lifted the mannequins away. So nothing's changed, and we've just made it a little bit more dynamic when the ball goes into the middle, and just made it more like a rondo play. So rather than being quite prescriptive with what we're doing, if you have more numbers, you could go with a back 4. So it gets you used to promoting fullbacks. And then what we would do, we would sometimes change the 2 and the 7 and the 3 and the 11. And then you might have the odd player that you wanted to change in the middle. We tried to be position specific if we could within this. But again, you could add a goal in at the end as well, where maybe the ball goes up and you finish into a goal. You have loads of different ways to do this. But again, so the phase of play was the first thing that I did. Well, after watching it from the game, this was the second part. And then it was really easy. I was sitting watching it and saying, how could I strip this back into a passing exercise or something to that equivalent to allow them to discover the movement? And it was just literally dropping some mannequins in. And it was a little bit more kind of laid back from that point of view. So nothing groundbreaking in terms of the exercise. It's a rondo. But I think you have to be specific with your rondos so we can relate these back to positions in the game. So technically we've got a back 3, a middle 2, sort of 3 across the front, and that number 5 could technically be a number 9. So we're already starting to build in a 4-2-3-1, for example, and then we're actually starting to look at how can we get into a 4-3-3. The only thing that we're actually missing here, or a 3-4-3 box, is that extra defender. So it's about manipulating your numbers to help get your desired outcome from that as well. So guys, I'm not too sure if you've got any kind of questions on that part. It's very similar to the first one, except it's just making it a little bit more kind of game specific.
I had a little one, mate.
Yep.
Is there like one player out there which you typically see that is starting the movements to encourage the others? Is it most of the time the 6, or does it just vary on the play?
Yeah, I think we look at, if I take it back here, Jamie, to like the 5, for example, kind of speaking about triggers. He's the first guy, I suppose, that kind of triggers the full thing because he's quite narrow. I remember the team that I worked with in here, they were fabulous at it. It was a wonderful team. They really understood this. So they would know this position, and it was almost like a chain reaction after that, Jamie. The 6 would probably be the next guy to move. For this option, your 6 and your 10 were probably moving quite simultaneously, and then your 7. So it was just almost like a chain reaction from that. So I'd probably say the centre-back was the first guy, and then one of the holding midfield players, either your 8 or your 6, was your next guy. And then it was coming to your 10. Probably the last guy that was moving was your wide player. We would actually say, maybe talking about coaching specifics, move slowly, walk in there. Because I used to play centre-back, and if I played against a player who moved quick all the time, if something catches your eye line, Jamie, quickly, you tend to look at it. But see if you get somebody who's really cute and just moves slowly out your vision, before you know it, he's gone. I once played in a game against Ali McCoist, who was one of the best strikers ever, and he'd no legs, he couldn't run, he was coming to the end of his career, and he roasted me in the box and scored a goal. And I said to him, Ali, how did you do that? He says, Willie, when you looked at the ball, I just moved off your shoulder and I couldn't see him. So we sometimes say to 11 and 7, we'd a player, Scott Sinclair, for a few seasons, who was wonderful at this. He would just drift in. Before you know it, he was almost in like a double 10, and then fullback was bombing forward. So that was little bits of fine detail we'd speak about. And then when you get into these positions, for me, Jamie, after those triggers, the technical information was like body shape. Try and see where you're receiving and where you want to go, and eliminate your opponent really quickly. Now, see, although we're dominating the ball in here 4v3, if we keep it in here for 7-8 passes, another opposition player is going to get dragged towards the ball. Take them in, get your numerical superiority, dominate them, but then get the ball forward and get a quick solution. That would be the kind of information to the players in there as well.
Cool. And then my last little one on that, sorry to keep going on. Does that movement from the 7 inside, does that kind of go on your player profiles? Like you said, Scott Sinclair then was really good at that. A Juan Mata might be good at that. But what if you had a winger that really liked to hug the touchline and get at them? Would that kind of be different then?
But both. So we have a player like James Forrest, for example, through our academy. James is an absolute flying machine. Great on the touchline. I'll take fullbacks on the outside all the time. But to go back to Adrian's point, it was good to show them something a little bit different. So if you've got a young player who at 15, 16 is a flying machine, or at 13, maybe they've physically matured quite quickly. And then all of a sudden when they get to 16, that clever movement isn't quite there. Or maybe you have a player who played position 9 at 7-a-side, but he's suited to going on the outside. You can actually get him to come in and get close to your 10 and 9. So we actually did have that. We had a player like James Forrest. I said, now he starts to mix his game up a little bit. So fullbacks knew that he's going to come and take me on. But then he started to drift in, and it was like, hold on, he's never done that before. So I think it's about just recognising your players. If you've got a player who's very good at that, then you want to play to their strengths. But to go back to Adrian's point, I think it's just another sort of string to the bow that you could put in there for them.
I love that idea, Willie, of sometimes it's better to just sort of subtly move into spaces or move away from defenders. I think, especially in American culture, we're very focused on being explosive and, 100 miles an hour. And so it's good to think about the other side of that. It makes a lot of sense, but I'd never thought of it in that way. And you're right, Alan McCoist was the master, I think, of that, wasn't he? I was lucky to play alongside him when I was at the highest point in my career and he was at the lowest point in his career. He was the master at that.
I always remember it. It was actually in the 6-yard box. Played a game at Murray Park at the time, and somebody's went down the outside, and I've got him. I'm like, he's not got away from me. And then when I looked at the ball, he'd moved in behind me. So I used that as a moment as a young player to actually remember that. And I remembered it as a coach. And I think it's about just finding, we always say to those, that's why we say to the 7-11, find the sweet spot, find the area where the fullback feels uncomfortable and also the wide player feels uncomfortable. Because let's be honest, wide players don't want to defend. So they don't want to come in and try and defend against you. And fullbacks feel uncomfortable when they get dragged into a central area. Yeah. So we would always say, if the opposition fullback comes, pop one over the top. So you don't always need to come into the middle area. So that would be another option in this as well. And again, that's a decision making of the number 5. If that fullback comes in and makes it 4 versus 4, bang, find your fullback, and you see like Andy Robertson, for example, at Liverpool, he'll just get the afterburners on as well and quite quickly just go up and play over the press. You don't always have to go through, but 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to dominate the middle of the pitch, and it's just about those types of movements. And again, if I go back to my 4 points, the timing, the triggers, the kind of sort of body shape and things like that, this is these 4 key aims that I'm trying to hammer, but you can then unpack each one of them. So you can unpack timing a little bit, you can unpack body shape, and that's why my session planner looks pretty basic and thin, but you can layer a lot more on when you actually see it in practice.
Yeah.
I love being on the panel with you, Ross. At least you're politically correct. I was thinking the same, but you put it so much nicer than what I would have done. So
somebody's got to be diplomatic on these calls, Adrian.
Exactly. I appreciate it, mate. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Right. And probably, guys, just the kind of last part of it is kind of going into the phase of play. So this is the moment where we would bring the 2 players who were doing their IDPs, and they would come back in to join. So defending team set up back 4 and a middle 3. Our key team would be back 3, a 2-3-1. And it's just a kind of good old-fashioned phase of play. We'd have a ruck of balls at the halfway line with the coach and some footballs with the opposite side goalkeeper. And we would just say to the Greens, basically go try score. Yellows, if you win possession, we would ask them to try and build the play up over the halfway line. You could have 2 counter goals there as well. I think it's important to give them something to look towards. So corners, free kicks, throw-ins, different restarts as well. And the whole idea would be try to build the play up. Can the players recognise the triggers? So we've got here, for example, the 10 moves across, 8's in a different line, the 6 moves up. Can the 7 recognise the trigger to drop in? 2 gives us the width. Ball can come in to give us a 4 versus 3, and then your 5 and the 3. And the good thing is now you can really start to look at your pitch markings in here. Now, as we start to travel up the pitch, guys, I'm going to see if I can be a wee bit fancy here, if I can try and do this. So as this happens, we'd be saying to our 5, get up there a little bit, your number 3, get a little bit higher, 8 would move higher, and that's where we would start to counter press everything. So all of a sudden, we would probably be playing the game in a 50-yard area in the opposition's half. And that goes back to about counter press. So if we've managed to get this numerical superiority, we're in the opposition's half. If we do lose it, we're in a very good position. And all I would say to the players is suffocate them. Just suffocate the life out of them. Force them into turnovers. Force them into being really stressed. And when we win the ball back, we impose our play on the opposition again. So although the kind of main session for me was about this movement, the timing, numerical superiority, there was a real emphasis on what we do behind the ball as well. And it's a really, again, everyone across the world is doing these sort of phases of play. And then what I would do is maybe in this situation, for example, I would randomly shout corner, and then I have to leave that ball, run to the next one. How quickly can they adjust? Or I would shout goal kick. So the goalkeeper has to take a goal kick. How can we get in? Or maybe when the yellows are out of position, I'll fire a ball over the top. How do we then deal with that as well? So we would only do this for 10 minutes. Lucky if I would maybe stop it once or not at all. I'd maybe just speak to the players. So this is the 10-minute tactical side with the older players, which we do every single session. So this was almost like guys, let's wrap everything up what we've done in the session, and can we put it into a more realistic play when they went into their game at the end, the 8v8 or 9v9, we would set them up in a team in a formation, but we'd kind of let them go after that. They've had enough. So in terms of the main coaching part of it, kind of tended to be done in the first passing exercise, less coaching in the rondo. And when I start to get to this bit, the players are almost starting to take over that empowering bit. If I could give one piece of advice as a coach, when you feel like you want to stop it, wait one more second, because it might not be perfect in what you want, but the outcome might still be good. So although this movement might not be perfect, but say we score, we'll say, well, there's kind of nothing wrong with that. An analogy that I could use was a story about a tennis player. Sorry, Damien, I'm away on a story again. And they went and watched this kid, and he was smashing everybody, beating everybody, but he had a horrible style. Like his elbows were in and he held the racket, and people were looking at it and saying, this kid's style's wrong, it's terrible, but he's smashing everybody. What do we do? Do we change his style? They decided to leave him, and that tennis player was Bjorn Borg. So he turned out to be a no bad tennis player. So I think sometimes as a coach, you look at it and say, it's maybe not quite what we're looking for, but the outcome was really good. So let's kind of just allow, and that would be a wee piece of advice to other coaches out there is, see if you feel like you're going to stop it, just step back, let it go for one more second, because something magic might happen. And I tend to do stoppages when the play breaks down. So if I see something I'm not too keen on, I'll let it stop until there's a free kick, a corner, or a break in play, then rewind it back, show it, and kind of let it flow again. Again, just my preference as a coach, really. So this would be the last part. I've not got the game to show, but this will be the last part on that, Damien.
Willie, I know you spoke earlier about kind of wondering how you would defend this. Thinking about that, like what would you do? Would you leave the fullback to do the work, or is there a point in the season, if you were, going back to this topic, or if you had the numbers with the yellow team, would you have them with a 7 and 11 to create the question for the attacking team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could even potentially take, if you could try and manipulate it, take another player out of the attacking team, which still allows you to get the sort of box in midfield to put that 7-11 in. I would see if I was working on the defensive side at Damien, I definitely would do that. I think initially you want to get that wee bit of success within it, but then absolutely I would stick a 7-11 if numbers permitted, or maybe take out, okay guys, rather than go with a back four, let's go with a back three and stick this player out here. And maybe we don't need a back three here. Maybe we'll just go with a back two, for example, who can act like fullbacks, and let's put one of them here. Or you maybe want to take the 6 out. I think you can manipulate that anyway. That's actually a really good point, Damien, about having those players in there to recognise whether if this fullback gets dragged in here, do we need to pop the ball over the top and kind of destroy that space? Or does the wide player come in and screen? What do we do? So I think that's a great point, Damien. Definitely something you would do as a coach. I think you need to do that in your reflection part of it. That's the kind of last slide that I've got as well. Once you reflect on that session to say, okay, how can I make it harder? Definitely would be stick a 7-11 in for the opposition.
Cool.
Sorry, Ross, have you got something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, just kind of say on the teaching mechanics again, if you will. That's the worst ever, isn't it? When you freeze it and then a kid goes by something and puts it in the top corner and they're trying to make a point. But something you said earlier along those lines as well that I wanted to bring up was, presenting the information or teaching the information, but then still moving on, even if they haven't quite grasped it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's another area we get hung up on is, we don't want to move on and we're doing the same exercise for 45 minutes because we feel that they haven't learned it. Can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, do you know what came from my own experience as a player, Ross? You probably think about it yourself. That when you had that coach that said, we won't be moving on until we get it, and you were bored out of your mind, and you're kind of saying, just really want to play football. So again, my preference was the coach would say, okay, we've got this sort of 16 minutes that we're going to work on it. the players haven't quite understood it, to go back to Adrian's point you made at the start of the session, maybe it's a little bit more taking them back into the classroom, showing them some clips, sending them some extra materials so that they can understand it. As you know, kids all learn in different ways as well. But for me, there's the organisation of the session. I know exactly, okay, we've got these 90 minutes. Here's how the 90 minutes look. Here's how it looks in each drill. If we don't quite get it, we say to the players, don't worry, it's a mistake-making pitch. You're allowed to make mistakes, because see, if you don't make a mistake, then you don't need me. I'm out of job. My wife's got expensive taste. Probably end up losing her. So it's all because of you. You have a bit of partner with them and you just say, like, listen, come on and make a mistake. You're okay. And see, even when you go on a Sunday or a Saturday, it's still a mistake-making pitch. The thing is, then we need to get them to understand that when you keep doing the same thing, okay, how can we rectify that and maybe get you making a slightly better decision? And that goes back to my presentation yesterday about, as young as we can, get them to recognise the situations and making better decisions as players. So again, it's just my preference, Ross. I hated it as a player, and it's just my way as a coach. It's just I see a lot of teams out there doing it, and I kind of feel sorry for the kids. And I thought that used to be me looking up at the coach, just saying, "Going to shut up." And I think the players switch off after a wee while as well.
It's funny you say that, Willie, as well. You know, it's how you've learned. And I know you was doing, you know, the corn-fed coaching podcast there before. You learn earlier as you've come out the game. Do you know what I mean? Like, because your career didn't make it as a player, you was coaching earlier, so you learned earlier. It's the same. So you learn from the mistakes of people that have done for you. It's the same. I became better at understanding periodization by realizing that my coaches ran me through the sand dunes. Didn't need to be ran through the sand dunes.
Same.
You know?
Same. Yep.
So you learn from that. But I think one of the things that we're still always learning, I think, and this is a wonderful thing that Damo and I have had this conversation a long time about the Sesh here, and since session 1 when Ross did it, about this is what we want to be happening on here is that, we want to be showing new activities to people. But I think Ross is 100% right. Is what can we learn on the tidbits of coaching and the teaching mechanisms of how we get the message across as well? Because we go to these conventions, we've all been there. You're a pro at it now, Willie. You're a senior, have been presenting at the convention, and people walk away and go, I've seen it all before. But you really haven't seen it all before if you're not learning. It's like you take it, now what I've seen it, but now what can I use from it to make it better for my environment? You know, so yeah. And I think this is one of the things that you've been great at doing today, and this is the whole point of why we want people like you here on the Sesh, you know. So because I think listening to your stuff here that you're saying, I think it's great, because for me it's just like you're a player's coach as well. You know, I'm sure players love to play for you because you want the kids to play, you want the kids to learn, you want the kids to make mistakes. I have a little rule as myself that I say, hey, I've got back pocket rules. And if the kids somehow make up their own rule, go ahead. It's fine. It's part of the game, you know? Yep. So
you make a good point, Adrian. I think that any time that I've maybe done a presentation, a lot of people contact me and say, can I get your presentation? And I kind of say no. And I say, the reason why I'm saying no is just find 1 or 2 bits of information. It's not the drills that you need to. I think back to when I first started out coaching, I used to have 1 million drills. It was all about getting as many drills. And when I got a little bit older, it's about the information. Yeah. It's about the environment that you create. It's about building relationships with your players and your staff and your other coaches. That for me is the essence of effective coaching and being able to do that. And it takes that wee bit of time. For me, coaching is not about having 1 million drills. I think it's great. You can do variety and stuff like that with your players, but it's a specific information that you can give to your kids when you're in those sort of situations.
Yeah, I mean, this one here is one drill with like 7 different varieties, you know. So,
exactly.
Yeah, no doubt. It's this, and then it's the Rondo, which is that, and then the passing pattern, which is the Rondo, or passing pattern.
Yeah.
But
and see, on that, Damien, one thing that I wanted to add, I had a good conversation with Dan Abrahams a couple of years ago. I think Dan is maybe on tonight, actually, in the convention. He's wonderful. And you usually go, when you coach in a linear process, you go from A to B to C to D is how you coach your practices. he said, try mixing it up. He says, so why don't you start with, so here I had passing, Rondo, phase of play, game. He says, why don't you start with the phase of play first and then go into a passing? So phase of play for 4 minutes, passing for 4 minutes, game for 4 minutes, Rondo. I said, I'm going to try that. And I did it when I went back. It really made me think as a coach. I was sweating bullets during the session because you're moving from one thing to another. You had to be alert. But also so did the players. Because sometimes when you play a Rondo, certain wee patterns become ingrained in their head. So if it's like a 4v2, they know every time they get the ball, they can flick it around the corner. And they're not really thinking about it. So what you would do is just take them, put them in an environment, take them out it, put them in another one. And I said to the players at the end, how did you find that? And they said, mentally exhausting, but brilliant. I'll be honest, I don't think I could do it every session because it is mentally draining for the coach as well. But it's something to kind of look out for. I thought it was another way of approaching things. And again, that was part of the kind of self-reflection. So these are some of the questions that I can ask myself and ask the players as well. And in terms of my own reflection. And when I did this, the players said to me on the Rondo, they wanted, when the ball went up the other side, to keep possession. They didn't want the transition because players like a wee moan. They say the ball's out, or it's our ball. They hated the transition. I took that on board. I tried it. For me, then they became too lazy because it was a kind of keep ball for the other three in the middle. So the reason why I said to them, here's why we've got this transition. So it kind of opened up a little bit of debate. They liked the opposition within the first practice, and they liked the fact that I didn't stop it so often. And they loved the fact that they got to play a game at the end, as they always do. But that's what I would ask the players. And for me, that's not a sign of weakness, asking the players. Don't get me wrong. If you're maybe a senior manager and you're front of a top Premier League team, then it's maybe you've got your generals in the changing room, you're going to your captain and stuff like that. But for me, when you're working with youth players, it's trying to empower them. And I remember I did another session on the incision zone, and the players said to me they felt the Rondo was too big, so they lost the quality in it. So I made it smaller the next time, and they said they loved it. And I said, well, guys, I took your feedback on board. So they understood that I was listening to them. So that kind of coach-athlete relationship was kind of at the heart of everything that we were trying to do. So I just wanted to show you this, guys, because I could be on here talking nonsense. This is Lennoxtown when it's not snowing. This is our training complex. So top left-hand corner, we've got the movement to create numerical superiority for a 4 versus 2. Bottom left, we've managed to draw the opposition in to combine and make it a 4v3, and then we break the press and get out their back four. We actually scored from this attack, and you can probably see here some of the stuff that I was talking about. This player here is our wide left player. This player here is a fullback, so look at that space that we can exploit. Again, he can still exploit that space, but we've now got the chance to go 2v1, and this is the area that we can now go and break the lines and get at the opposition's back four. So I kind of wanted to show that because that was important for me. I had some videos, but I know it can be a bit jumpy over Zoom, but this was just one example of how that worked within a game. And it was great because we were at home. That's where we train as well, so we can make a reference to where we were on the pitch. And then we used this and we showed the players at the next training session. This is why it's important. And then when they saw success, we got a little bit of more buy-in from the players as well. So I kind of wanted to show that one as well, guys, just to see that. So that's the session.
No, that's great stuff, Willie. We appreciate that. Like I said, I know that I definitely enjoyed your presentation through the convention, and I knew like right away just watching it and then talking to some people quickly that you were someone that believed in development and someone that we wanted to have come on the show. So I'm glad we were able to work it out given the time difference. So we do got the Rangers Academy guy.
You've just sworn at him. You just sworn at Willie.
Sorry, I never heard
so we'll see who gets the most views.
No, sorry.
Who gets the most views. We got the Ranger Academy going on.
No, listen, I appreciate you coming
see
on.
What happens yourself.
No, it's good to come on and speak to you guys, and obviously Adrian, good to connect yourself again as well.
Yeah,
Ross,
again, buddy.
as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on and speaking. I actually like this format, Damien. It's quite a unique format because when you've got guys that are very knowledgeable within the game, looking at what you're doing and being able to have a debate and pick some stuff, it's good for me as a coach as well. So I appreciate all the honesty as well, guys, and the feedback. So much appreciated.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Willie. The reason I know that was a top session or episode of the Sesh is I can't wait for my training on Saturday to put some of these ideas into place. So I mean that sincerely. Like, I'm looking forward to implementing some of this stuff with.
No, I appreciate it. I've got a bigger. That's part of a bigger presentation as well, Ross. If you ever wanted a wee look at it, you're more than welcome.
Ross, you're going to be trying that in the basement with your wee man tonight. I know what you're going to be doing.
We don't have enough room for an incision zone, but
brilliant.
All right, well, good stuff. Well, so we'll get this out, and so I guess we'll wrap it up if no one else has anything. All right, so that's a wrap for this afternoon. Please do subscribe to the Sesh wherever you listen to podcasts, and I say listen because we're going to start to put these out in podcast form, even though it's probably not the best thing, but we'll give it a shot to see if we can get some more people involved. Continue to follow Cornfed Coaching FC on YouTube to watch all the previous episodes and future episodes of the Sesh. We'll have some out next week featuring Samantha Snow and Garrett Smith, in addition to some others. So from all of us here at Cornfed Coaching FC, we wish you well.